The handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists with a sound that echoed through the entire neighborhood. My beautiful Rolls-Royce sat gleaming in my driveway while police officers searched through my personal belongings like I was some kind of criminal. Neighbors gathered on their front porches, phones out, recording every humiliating second. And there she was, Karen, standing at her window with the biggest smile I had ever seen, watching her plan unfold perfectly. Just 3 months earlier, I thought I was living the American dream. I had worked 20 years to afford that car. I had followed every rule, checked every regulation, done everything right. But I made one fatal mistake. I underestimated what jealousy and power could do when they combined in the wrong hands. That morning, as I stood there in handcuffs, I realized Karen had not just called the police on me. She had declared war, and she had no idea what she had just started. I never thought a car could change my life. But then again, I never thought 20 years of grinding, saving, and sacrificing would finally pay off the way it did. My name is David, and this is the story of how achieving my biggest dream turned into my worst nightmare, all because one woman could not stand to see someone else succeed. Let me take you back to where it all began. 3 months ago, I was standing in the most expensive car dealership I had ever set foot in. The Rolls-Royce Cullinan sat there like a piece of art, its black paint so perfect it looked like liquid midnight. The leather interior smelled like success, and the chrome details reflected my face back at me. For the first time in my life, I looked like someone who belonged in a place like this. You have to understand what this moment meant to me. I started my software company in my garage when I was 25. For 2 decades, I lived on instant noodles, worked 18-hour days, and watched every penny. While my friends bought houses and took vacations, I poured everything back into the business. I drove the same beat-up Honda for 15 years. I wore the same suits until the seams gave out. Every sacrifice was building toward this moment. The salesman handed me the keys, and I felt something I had never experienced before. Pure, overwhelming joy. This was not just a car. This was proof that the American dream was real. This was 20 years of hard work crystallized into something beautiful and tangible. I could hardly contain my excitement as I drove home to Willowbrook Estates, our quiet suburban neighborhood. The engine purred like a contented cat, and every surface inside the car felt like luxury itself. I imagined pulling into my driveway, maybe washing it on Sunday mornings, taking weekend drives through the countryside. I pictured my neighbors admiring it, maybe asking questions about the business that made it possible. Willowbrook Estates was exactly the kind of place where a car like this should fit perfectly. We had a homeowners association that kept everything pristine. The lawns were emerald green, the sidewalks were spotless, and every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. The HOA fees were steep, but they maintained common areas beautifully and kept property values high. It was the kind of neighborhood that said you had made it. Before I bought the Rolls-Royce, I did my homework. I spent hours reading through the HOA guidelines, looking for any restrictions on vehicles. The rules mentioned commercial vehicles, recreational vehicles, and boats. Nothing about luxury cars. Nothing about size restrictions. Nothing that would prevent me from parking my dream car in my own driveway. I even called the HOA office to double-check. The woman on the phone assured me that as long as the vehicle was properly registered and insured, there would be no problems. She actually sounded impressed when I mentioned it was a Rolls-Royce. She said it would probably enhance the neighborhood's reputation. As I turned onto Maple Street that first day, I felt like I was coming home as a different person. The struggling entrepreneur was gone. In his place sat a successful businessman who had earned his place in this beautiful community. I pulled into my driveway slowly, savoring every second. The car looked perfect against the backdrop of my house, like it had always belonged there. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, just taking it all in. The neighborhood was peaceful, the sun was shining, and my dream car was finally home. Everything felt perfect. If only I had known that perfection was about to become my greatest enemy. The trouble started exactly 24 hours after I brought the Rolls-Royce home. I was washing it in my driveway, taking my time, enjoying the way the soap suds slid down the pristine black paint. The morning sun made every surface sparkle, and I felt that same surge of pride I had experienced at the dealership. That is when I first noticed her watching me. Karen Williams lived 3 houses down from me, in a house that looked exactly like mine but somehow felt completely different. Where my home felt warm and welcoming, hers felt like a fortress. The lawn was cut with mathematical precision, not a single blade of grass out of place. Her windows always had the curtains drawn just enough to see out, but not enough for anyone to see in. I had seen her around the neighborhood before, usually carrying a clipboard or taking photos of various violations. She approached me that morning with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Karen was probably in her mid-50s, with blonde hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She wore a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, and she carried herself like someone who was used to being in charge. "Well, well," she said, stopping at the edge of my driveway. "That is quite the vehicle you have there." I turned off the hose and smiled back at her. "Thank you. I just brought it home yesterday. I have been saving up for this for years." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she walked around the car, examining it from every angle. Saving up, must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around. Some of us prefer to be more modest about our success. The comment stung, but I tried to stay friendly. "I worked really hard for this. It represents a lot of sacrifices and long nights building my business." "Your business," she repeated, like the words tasted sour in her mouth. "And what business would that be exactly?" I explained about my software company, how I had started it from nothing, how it had finally reached the point where I could afford some of the things I had always dreamed of. But Karen was not really listening. She was walking around the car again, taking pictures with her phone from different angles. "You know," she said, "this is a family neighborhood. We have children who play in these streets. I hope you are not planning to use this as some kind of show-off piece, racing around, disturbing the peace." I assured her that I was just a quiet neighbor who wanted to fit in with the community, but she had already moved on to her next concern. "The HOA guidelines are very specific about maintaining neighborhood character," she continued. "Vehicles that draw excessive attention or create disturbances can be problematic. I hope you check the rules before making such a significant purchase." I told her about my research, about calling the HOA office, about making sure everything was completely legal and appropriate. But Karen just smiled that cold smile again. "Rules can be interpreted many different ways," she said. "What matters is how they affect the community as a whole. I am sure you understand." Over the following days, I started to notice Karen everywhere. She would walk past my house at different times, always with her phone out, always taking pictures. She would stop and measure distances from my car to the sidewalk, from the car to my house, from the car to the property line. When I worked in my yard, she would find reasons to be outside, watching everything I did. Other neighbors began acting differently around me too. The friendly waves became hesitant nods. The casual conversations became awkward exchanges. I started to wonder what Karen was saying about me when I was not around. The first official complaint arrived in my mailbox on a Friday afternoon. It was typed on official HOA letterhead and signed by Karen Williams in her capacity as board secretary. The complaint alleged that my vehicle was inconsistent with neighborhood character and potentially disruptive to community harmony. It requested that I attend the next board meeting to discuss the matter. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. This was my home. This was my legal, properly registered, fully insured vehicle parked in my own driveway. How could anyone have a problem with that? But as I looked across the street and saw Karen watching me from her window, I realized that logic and fairness had nothing to do with this. This was about power, control, and jealousy, and Karen Williams had decided that I was her enemy. The war for my driveway had officially begun. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. I spent the entire week preparing, printing out the guidelines I had researched, gathering my vehicle registration, organizing my insurance documents. I was confident that once I presented the facts, this whole situation would be resolved quickly and reasonably. I had no idea that Karen had spent the same week building her case against me. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the entrance to our neighborhood. When I arrived, I was surprised to see how many people were there. Usually these meetings attracted maybe 10 residents. Tonight, there were at least 30 people packed into the room. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, looking every inch the professional authority figure. She had prepared a presentation complete with printed photos and what looked like official documents. As I took my seat in the back, I noticed several neighbors glancing at me and whispering to each other. When they called my name, I walked to the front of the room feeling confident. I explained my situation clearly and calmly. I showed them the guidelines that permitted my vehicle. I demonstrated that I had followed every rule and regulation. Several board members nodded along as I spoke, and I thought I was making progress. Then Karen stood up to respond. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this is about more than just one vehicle. This is about the character of our community and the precedent we set for future residents." She clicked to her first slide, which showed my Royce from multiple angles. But she had taken the photos at times when the lighting made the car look almost aggressive, imposing rather than elegant. "This vehicle costs more than many of our homes," she continued. "It sends a message that we are becoming the kind of neighborhood where showing off wealth is more important than fitting in with our neighbors." She had researched the exact price of my car model and displayed it on a slide. Seeing that number on the screen, I felt embarrassed for the first time about my purchase. The way she presented it made it sound obscene, inappropriate. "Furthermore," Karen continued, "we have received multiple complaints from residents about the disruption this vehicle has caused." She read from a list of alleged issues. The car was too large for my driveway. It blocked sight lines for children playing in the street. The frequent washing and maintenance created noise and water runoff problems. People were stopping to take pictures, increasing traffic and disturbing the peace. None of these things were true, but the way Karen presented them, with official-looking documents and serious tone, they sounded completely believable. Over the following days, the complaints escalated dramatically. I started receiving violation notices almost daily. My car was allegedly parked too close to the sidewalk, even though I measured it myself and knew it was well within guidelines. I was accused of washing my car too frequently, creating water pollution. I received warnings about the noise level of my engine, even on days when I had not driven anywhere. Each violation notice was professionally formatted and included photographs, witness statements, and references to specific HOA guidelines. Karen had clearly spent enormous amounts of time documenting every aspect of my daily routine. But the worst part was how she had turned my neighbors against me. People who used to wave and smile now crossed the street to avoid me. Parents pulled their children inside when I came home from work. The friendly community I had loved was becoming a hostile environment where I felt watched and judged constantly. I tried to fight back by attending every HOA meeting, by documenting the harassment, by demanding to see the specific complaints that had been filed against me. But Karen was always one step ahead. She would reference vague community concerns or anonymous complaints. She would cite guidelines that seemed to apply to my situation, but were written so broadly they could mean anything. The stress was eating away at me. I was not sleeping well, not enjoying my dream car, not feeling comfortable in my own home. Every day brought new accusations, new violations, new demands for compliance with rules that seemed to change depending on Karen's mood. The final straw came when I received a letter informing me that the HOA was opening a formal investigation into my pattern of community disruption. The letter suggested that my continued residence in the neighborhood might be incompatible with community standards. That night, I sat in my Royce in my own driveway, looking at my house and wondering how my dream had turned into such a nightmare. I had followed every rule, been respectful to every neighbor, done everything right. But somehow, I had become the villain in my own story. I had no idea that the real nightmare was just beginning. What happened next still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Karen had spent weeks building her case against me, documenting every move I made, turning my neighbors into witnesses against me. But harassment and violation notices were not enough for her. She wanted something bigger, something that would remove me from the neighborhood permanently. She wanted to destroy me completely. The plan began during the emergency HOA board meeting that I was not invited to attend. I only learned about it later, when one of the board members felt guilty enough to tell me what had really happened. Karen had convinced the other members that I was not just a neighborhood nuisance, but a potential security threat. She had spent hours crafting a narrative about my suspicious behavior, the expensive car that I could not possibly afford legitimately, the late nights working in my home office, which she claimed looked like possible drug dealing or money laundering activity. The fact that I had no close friends in the neighborhood, which she suggested indicated I was hiding something significant. Karen had photographs of me taking phone calls in my car, which she claimed were evidence of conducting illegal business. She had pictures of visitors to my house, including my business partner and my accountant, who she suggested looked like criminal associates. She had even researched my company's financial records and questioned how a small software business could generate enough income to afford such luxury. The board members, who had known me for years as a quiet, respectful neighbor, found themselves doubting their own perceptions. Karen presented her evidence with the confidence of a prosecutor, making her theories sound not just plausible but obvious. "We have a responsibility to protect this community," she told them. "If we ignore these warning signs and something happens, we will be held accountable." She proposed a solution that would address all their concerns while maintaining the appearance of following proper procedures. If there were legitimate concerns about criminal activity, the appropriate response was to involve law enforcement. Let the professionals investigate. Let them determine whether my presence in the neighborhood was a threat to community safety. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Karen was authorized to contact the police about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. I knew none of this was happening. On the morning Karen made her call, I was following my usual routine. I had worked late the night before on a client project, so I slept in until around 9 o'clock. I made coffee, checked my emails, and prepared to start my day like any other. The weather was beautiful, so I decided to wash my car before heading to the office. I gathered my supplies and headed outside, looking forward to spending some time in the sunshine. The Rolls-Royce looked magnificent in the morning light, and I felt that familiar surge of pride as I started washing it. I had no idea that Karen was watching me from her window, phone in hand, making the call that would change everything. "I need to report suspicious activity in my neighborhood," she told the 911 dispatcher. "There is a man at 1247 Maple Street who has been behaving very strangely. He has an extremely expensive car that he could not possibly afford legitimately. He works odd hours, has suspicious visitors, and I believe he may be involved in drug dealing or other criminal activity." She described me as agitated and potentially dangerous. She claimed I had been washing the car obsessively, which she said could be evidence of trying to remove evidence or preparing to flee. She mentioned that other neighbors were concerned and frightened, and that children in the area might be at risk. The dispatcher took her seriously because Karen sounded professional, credible, and genuinely concerned. She provided specific details, addresses, and observations that painted a picture of legitimate community danger. Multiple police cars were dispatched to investigate. As I scrubbed the soap off my car's hood, I was thinking about my schedule for the day. I had a client meeting at 11, lunch with my business partner at 1, and a conference call with investors at 3. It was going to be a productive day, and I was looking forward to driving my beautiful car to each appointment. I was completely absorbed in my work when I heard the first siren in the distance, then another, and another. They seemed to be getting closer, but I assumed they were heading to some emergency elsewhere in the neighborhood. Crime was rare in Willowbrook Estates, but occasionally there were medical emergencies or minor incidents that required police response. It never occurred to me that they were coming for me. Karen positioned herself at her front window, camera ready, waiting for the show to begin. She had orchestrated this moment perfectly, timing her call to maximize the drama and ensure maximum neighborhood visibility. This was not just about removing me from the community. This was about making an example of me, showing everyone what happened to people who did not respect her authority. The sirens were getting louder now. The first police car turned onto Maple Street at exactly 9:47 a.m. I remember the time because I was checking my watch, thinking about when I needed to leave for my first appointment. The car moved slowly down the street, and I glanced up from washing my Rolls-Royce, mildly curious about where they were heading. Then the car stopped directly in front of my house. My heart started pounding before my brain fully processed what was happening. A second police car appeared, then a third. 3 officers stepped out, their hands resting on their weapons, their faces serious and alert. They looked at me like I was a dangerous criminal they had been hunting for months. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," the lead officer commanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made my legs weak. "Keep your hands where we can see them." I dropped the sponge I was holding and raised my hands, water dripping from my fingers onto the driveway. "Officers, I think there has been some kind of mistake. This is my house, this is my car. I was just washing it." "Step away from the vehicle now," the officer repeated, louder this time. "Move slowly toward the sidewalk." I could see neighbors emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Peterson from next door stood on her front porch with her phone out, recording everything. The family across the street gathered at their window, watching like this was some kind of entertainment. And there, at her window, was Karen. She was not even trying to hide her satisfaction. As I moved toward the sidewalk with my hands raised, the officers approached the Rolls-Royce like it was evidence in a major crime. One of them peered through the windows, another examined the license plate, a third started taking photographs from multiple angles. We received a report about suspicious activity at this address, the lead officer explained. We need to verify your identity and ownership of this vehicle. I reached slowly for my wallet, but the officer immediately tensed up. Do not reach for anything. Tell me where your identification is located. It is in my back pocket, I said, my voice shaking now. My driver's license and registration are both there. The officer retrieved my wallet himself, examining my identification while his partners kept their eyes on me. By now, a crowd had gathered. At least 15 neighbors stood watching from various positions around the street. Some were openly recording with their phones. Others whispered to each other, speculating about what I had done. Mr. Stevens, we have received reports that you may be involved in illegal activity, the officer said. The caller indicated that you could not legitimately afford this vehicle and that you have been behaving suspiciously. The words hit me like a physical blow. Officer, I own a software company. I have been saving money for 20 years to buy this car. Everything is completely legal and legitimate. But even as I spoke, I could see the doubt in his eyes. The car was worth more than most people make in a year. I was standing in my bathrobe and slippers at 9 in the morning, which probably did not look very professional. And Karen had clearly presented a very convincing case against me. We are going to need to search the vehicle, the officer informed me. If everything is legitimate as you claim, this will be resolved quickly. They searched every inch of my beautiful Rolls-Royce. They opened every compartment, examined every surface, tested every liquid they found. They searched the interior, the trunk, the engine compartment. They were looking for drugs, weapons, stolen goods, or any evidence that would support Karen's accusations. The humiliation was overwhelming. Here I was, in my own driveway, watching police officers treat my dream car like it was evidence in a crime scene. My neighbors stood watching, many of them now convinced that they had been living next to a criminal. I could already imagine the phone calls, the text messages, the social media posts that would spread the news throughout the community. After 20 minutes of searching, the officers found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But by then, the damage was done. Karen had achieved exactly what she wanted. She had turned me from a successful businessman into a suspected criminal in the eyes of everyone who mattered. As the officers prepared to leave, one of them handed me a business card. Mr. Stevens, I want you to know that we take all reports seriously, but we found no evidence of wrongdoing here. However, if you are having ongoing disputes with neighbors, you might want to consider contacting a lawyer. The police cars drove away, but the neighbors remained. They stood in small groups, whispering and pointing. Some took photos of me standing next to my car. Others walked past slowly, trying to get a better look at the man who had brought police to their quiet street. I stood there for a long time after everyone had gone inside, just staring at my Rolls-Royce. The soap had dried on the paint, leaving streaks and spots that would need to be cleaned again. But that was not what bothered me. What bothered me was the realization that Karen had won. She had successfully destroyed my reputation, my sense of security, and my place in the community. And she had done it all with lies. The humiliation of that morning changed something fundamental inside me. For weeks, I had been playing defense, trying to prove that I belonged in the neighborhood, that I deserved to own my dream car, that I was not the villain Karen had painted me to be. But lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that defense was not enough. If I wanted to reclaim my life, I needed to go on offense. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I started investigating Karen Williams. I began with public records, which revealed immediately that Karen was not the perfect neighbor she pretended to be. Her own property had multiple violations on file with the county, including unpermitted additions to her house, a fence that extended beyond property lines, and drainage issues that had caused problems for adjacent homes. Yet somehow, none of these violations had ever been addressed by the HOA. Then I discovered something even more interesting. Karen had been involved in similar disputes with other neighbors over the past 5 years. Each time, the pattern was identical. A new resident would move in, usually someone successful or different from the established community. Karen would find reasons to target them, filing complaints, organizing opposition, making their lives miserable until they either conformed completely to her vision or moved away entirely. I started reaching out to former residents who had left the neighborhood under mysterious circumstances. What I found was shocking. Karen had targeted a family because their teenage son played music in their garage. She had harassed a retired couple because they painted their house a slightly different shade of white than the rest of the street. She had made life so difficult for a single mother that the woman had eventually sold her house at a loss just to escape the constant harassment. But her campaign against me was different. It was more systematic, more calculated, and more vicious than anything she had done before. My success, my visible achievement, had triggered something deeper and more dangerous in Karen's psychology. I started documenting everything. I installed security cameras around my property, capturing Karen's frequent surveillance activities. I recorded her measuring my car's position, photographing my house at different times of day, and approaching other neighbors with what appeared to be leading questions about my behavior. The breakthrough came when I gained access to the HOA's financial records. As a homeowner, I had the right to review how my fees were being spent, but I had never bothered to look before. What I found was evidence of systematic corruption and abuse of power that went far beyond personal harassment. Karen had been using her position on the board to direct contracts to companies owned by her friends and family members. She had approved thousands of dollars in unnecessary expenditures for projects that primarily benefited properties near her own home. She had even used HOA funds to pay for legal consulting that was related to her personal disputes rather than legitimate community business. More importantly, I discovered that the emergency board meeting where they had authorized her to call the police had never actually happened. Karen had fabricated the entire story about board approval. She had acted entirely on her own, using the HOA's authority as cover for what was essentially a personal vendetta. But the most damaging evidence came from the security footage. My cameras had captured Karen not just watching my house, but actively vandalizing my property. She had thrown trash on my lawn, damaged my mailbox, and even scratched my car with a key on multiple occasions. She had done these things carefully, at times when she thought no one was watching, always making sure the damage was minor enough to be dismissed as random incidents. I also discovered that Karen had been spreading false information about me throughout the community. She had told neighbors that I was under investigation by the IRS, that my business was a front for illegal activities, and that police had advised her to keep watch on my house for the safety of the neighborhood. None of these things were true, but Karen had presented them with such confidence and authority that people had believed her. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. One of the police officers who had responded to Karen's call contacted me directly. He had become suspicious about the nature of the complaint, particularly after finding no evidence to support any of Karen's claims. His investigation had revealed that Karen had made similar false reports about other residents in the past, and that she had a pattern of using law enforcement as a weapon in personal disputes. "Mr. Stevens," the officer told me during a phone call, "what happened to you was wrong. This woman has been abusing the system, and it needs to stop. If you are willing to press charges, we have enough evidence to support a case for filing false reports and harassment." As I sat in my home office, surrounded by documents, photographs, and recorded evidence, I realized that I now had something Karen had never expected me to obtain. I had the truth, not just about what she had done to me, but about what she had been doing to our entire community for years. Karen had spent weeks building a case against me based on lies and manipulation. Now, I had months of evidence documenting her actual crimes and abuses of power. The question was not whether I could prove her guilt. The question was how far I was willing to go to make sure she faced consequences for what she had done. The answer was simple. I was willing to go as far as necessary. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in November, exactly 3 months after the police had handcuffed me in my own driveway. This time, however, I was not the one being investigated. I was the one presenting evidence. I had spent weeks preparing my presentation, organizing every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence into a comprehensive case that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. I had consulted with attorneys, confirmed the legal implications of Karen's actions, and prepared formal complaints with both the police and the state attorney general's office. The community center was packed that evening, with more residents than had ever attended an HOA meeting in the neighborhood's history. Word had spread that something significant was going to happen, and people were curious about what new drama would unfold. Karen sat at the board table looking confident and composed, clearly expecting this to be another opportunity to air her grievances against me. She had prepared her own materials, probably planning to rehash all the same accusations that had worked so well for her in the past. When I stood up to address the room, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. But instead of defending myself against Karen's accusations, I did something no one expected. I went on the attack. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "tonight I am going to show you evidence of systematic corruption, harassment, and criminal behavior that has been poisoning our community for years." I presented the financial records showing Karen's misuse of HOA funds. I showed the security footage of her vandalizing my property. I played recorded phone calls where she spread false information about me to other residents. I presented testimony from other neighbors who had been targeted by her harassment campaigns. The room fell completely silent as the evidence mounted. Board members who had supported Karen looked shocked and horrified. Neighbors who had believed her lies about me began to understand how thoroughly they had been manipulated. But the most powerful moment came when I presented the police report documenting Karen's false accusations. The officer had provided a detailed statement explaining how Karen had wasted law enforcement resources and potentially endangered community safety by filing fabricated emergency reports. "Karen Williams did not just harass me," I told the room. "She committed crimes. She stole from our community. She lied to police officers. She turned neighbor against neighbor for her own personal satisfaction." Karen tried to defend herself, but her usual confidence had evaporated. Faced with undeniable evidence of her own misconduct, she could only sputter weak denials and desperate attempts to redirect attention back to her grievances against me. The board vote was unanimous. Karen was immediately removed from her position and banned from all future HOA activities. The community voted to pursue criminal charges against her for the misuse of funds and false police reports. Within 2 weeks, Karen had put her house up for sale. She could not face the same neighbors she had tried to turn against me, now that they knew the truth about her character and her actions. The for sale sign in her yard felt like the sweetest victory I could have imagined. My Rolls-Royce still sits in my driveway, as beautiful as the day I brought it home. But now when I wash it on Sunday mornings, neighbors stop to admire it and ask about my business. They apologize for believing Karen's lies. They welcome me back into the community I had worked so hard to join. Sometimes